Today's lecture is on interaction ritual theory, a theory about social rituals, their ingredients, and their outcomes, introduced by sociologist Randall Collins and based on the work of earlier sociologists like Emile Durkheim and Irving Goffman. Let's start with talking about the term ritual. In our everyday use of the word, the term ritual can be thought of as referring to formal ceremonies, involving stereotyped actions such as reciting verbal formulas, singing, making traditional gestures, wearing traditional costumes, and so on, typically in religious situations. According to this approach, rituals are socially recurring events where predetermined behaviors, what Collins calls stereotyped actions, are typically enacted and reenacted. However, sociologists who study rituals often adopt a less restrictive approach to understanding what a ritual is. Rituals could be, but don't have to be, religious. In fact, there are many social behaviors in everyday life in which we as human beings engage in repetitive behaviors. In addition, they could be, but don't have to be, formal events like graduation ceremonies or military parades, which often have formally prescribed forms of behavior. For instance, how to wear your graduation cap, when to move the tassel from right to left, when to sit and rise, or in the case of military parades, when to march in step, when to salute, and so on. Instead of only being restricted to religion or to formal practices, rituals are often informal, for instance, common forms of crowd behaviors at sports games or concerts, or informal patterns of interactional behaviors at social events. These latter forms of social rituals can be thought of as natural rituals, rather than formal rituals, in the sense that they typically arise more organically without the need for formal rules, guidelines, or procedures. Having established what rituals are, what then is interaction ritual theory? Interaction ritual theory refers to a microsociological approach to understanding the kinds of ingredients that make up social rituals and the social outcomes we can expect when social rituals go well or don't go well. When we say microsociological here, we mean that we are adopting an approach to understanding some social phenomenon, in this case ritual, through examining how humans interact with one another. In contrast, a macrosociological approach would be less focused on interpersonal human interactions and more on broader things like what rituals do for society as a whole, as well as the kind of broader environmental conditions that give rise to some rituals but not others, or that determine the success of these rituals. In this way, scholars studying rituals through a microsociological lens are much more likely to focus on small groups or even one-on-one interactions between two people. In contrast, those adopting a macrosociological lens might be more interested in large groups of people in which these people are analyzed not as individuals acting individually, but rather as a unitary group, as if the group itself is a single giant person to be studied. Collins argues that successful rituals require four key ingredients: group assembly, also called bodily co-presence, a barrier to outsiders, a mutual focus of attention, and a shared mood. Group assembly or bodily co-presence refers to a collection of two or more people who are physically gathered in the same place. Although more recent scholars have criticized whether this ingredient is actually crucial to social rituals, at least to Collins, rituals tend to be more effective the more people there are and when the ritual takes place in person rather than, say, online. The second ingredient, a barrier to outsiders, means that those participating have an awareness of who is participating and who is excluded. This awareness typically comes about through actual exclusion of non-participants. For instance, events like sports games or concerts have formal barriers in that one has to pay the price of admission to be allowed in. At other events, there may not be the same formal barriers, but one may nevertheless be socially excluded from participating. For instance, trying to join a basketball game as a stranger, or attending a small social gathering to which one was not invited. In both these cases, there are no formal rules preventing you from entering, but the people involved may exclude you anyway. The third ingredient, mutual focus of attention, refers to how people at a social ritual should have their attentions focused on the same common object or person or activity in such a way that participants are aware that the other people around them are also focused on the same object, person, or activity. For instance, if the ritual is a public rally or a church service, the success of the ritual depends in part on whether the audience present are actually paying attention to the speaker or not. Finally, the fourth ingredient is that people at the ritual should be present with the same shared mood or emotions. For instance, if the social ritual is some exciting event like a wedding celebration, the ritual success would be threatened or reduced if there are guests who are sullen and grumpy. In contrast, at a ritual like a funeral, this ritual success would be threatened or reduced if there are attendees who are irrationally happy. In addition, Collins suggests that the last two ingredients, shared mood and mutual focus of attention, often create a feedback loop. This means that as the mutual focus of attention in the group increases, the emotions people are already sharing grow even more in intensity. Collective cheering at a cinema-going experience is a good example of this, in which, at an exciting moment in the film, people's awareness of others sharing in this same excitement, such as when people start cheering, makes everyone feel that excitement even more profoundly. Should the four ingredients discussed be present and combined successfully in high enough levels, in other words, if the ritual is successful, it should produce a number of outcomes. Group solidarity refers to a feeling of belonging and membership to the group. We often see this in unifying forms of behavior, such as when people are hugging and giving each other high fives, or simply just sharing a feeling of satisfaction, if not happiness, at being in the presence of and feeling connected with the people in the group who are part of the ritual. Closely related to group solidarity is the emotional energy one feels as an individual of the group. As mentioned earlier, group solidarity is often expressed in ways that involve emotional energy, such as feelings of confidence, elation, strength, enthusiasm, and initiative in taking action. Third, in a successful ritual, symbols that represent the group that engaged in this ritual activity, for instance words, gestures, or visual icons, are often imbued with a deeper sense of respect. Religious rituals may make one feel a great sense of respect, awe, and sacredness for religious objects like sacred texts, artifacts, or sacred names. However, more secular rituals also have their own common symbols. For instance, sports teams and their respective institutions have their mascots, while countries have their flags. How do we express this respect for group symbols? Often through a feeling of obligation to defend these symbols against those who would disrespect them, whether they be outsiders who mock or devalue these symbols, or even members of the group itself, whom we might feel don't treat these symbols with the respect they deserve. Finally, successful rituals also typically imbue in the participants a sense of morality, an understanding of rightness and wrongness, especially in relation to group symbols. This sense of morality is often expressed through the willingness to defend a symbol from being disrespected by others, as discussed earlier. The intensity of these ritual outcomes depends, as noted earlier, on the successful combination of sufficient levels of the four ritual ingredients. To the extent that one or more of them are absent or of a lower intensity, we would, according to Collins' approach, therefore expect one or more of these outcomes to be produced less successfully, if at all. For instance, using the example of cinema going once more, one would expect that the larger the group assembly, the more effective the ritual of cinema going will be in creating heightened levels of emotional energy. It would be far more difficult to feel this level of excitement in other audience members if there were only a handful of viewers seated far apart from each other in the seats. In this lecture, we have talked about interaction ritual theory as a microsociological approach to understanding how rituals work, the ingredients that make up a successful ritual, at least according to Collins, and the outcomes one expects in a successful ritual. Ritual ingredients, as we discussed earlier, are comprised of a physical group assembly involving two or more people, some form of barrier that excludes outsiders, a central focus of attention shared by participants, and a shared mood to go along with it. Should a ritual be successful, we would in turn expect feelings of membership or group solidarity, elevated levels of emotional energy, greater respect towards the symbols that represent the group, and finally, strengthened notions of morality in terms of right and wrong among the participants, especially with respect to the group symbols.